My husband changed the password on the folder that held the papers for my house 3 days before my mother asked me to save my brother again. It was such a small thing that morning I almost hated myself for noticing it. Evan was standing at the kitchen counter in gray sweatpants, eating toast over the sink like he always did when he was late, and I was packing my lunch in one of those plastic containers with the warped lid that never sealed quite right. The coffee maker clicked off. The dog next door started barking. Nothing about the room looked dramatic enough to hold a warning. Then I opened the shared folder on my phone and got the little red message telling me access had been denied. "Did you change the login on the house file?" I asked. Evan didn't turn around right away. He kept chewing, then reached for his coffee mug and said too casually, "I cleaned up some of the cloud stuff last night." It was a mess. The folder wasn't cloud stuff. It was the scanned deed, the insurance renewal, the last tax bill, and a grainy PDF of my grandmother's handwritten note from when she left me the house. Nothing in it had changed in months. I stood there with my hands still around the lunch container and felt something small and cold move through me. "Oh," I said, "can you text me the new one later?" He glanced at the microwave clock. "I'm already behind." He kissed the side of my head on his way out, picked up his keys and left like we had just finished an ordinary married conversation instead of one I would replay in my head for the rest of the day. I was 27 years old, and by most outside measures, I was the kind of woman people described as lucky. I had a steady job at a title office in Jeffersontown outside Louisville. I had a husband who looked good in family photos and knew how to carry folding chairs 2 at a time at church functions. I had inherited a small brick house from my grandmother Ruthie when I was 24, which in my family had always been spoken about with a softness that covered something harder underneath, like everybody was trying not to sound resentful while feeling exactly that. The house sat on a quiet street in Okolona with a crooked mailbox and a porch light that only worked if you jiggled the switch twice. My grandmother had kept plastic covers on the sofa cushions until the year she died and wrapped leftover pound cake in wax paper instead of foil because she said foil made cake taste like sadness. It was the first place in my life that ever felt stable from front door to back fence. My younger brother, Caleb, had never once called it my house without a joke in his voice. He was 25 and handsome in the careless way that made older women at church say things like, "That boy just hasn't found his footing yet." He had found plenty of things. A motorcycle he couldn't afford, a roofing job he quit after 5 weeks, a girlfriend in Elizabethtown he moved in with and out of before the lease was up, and most recently a 1-bedroom apartment he was apparently about to lose because his landlord had gone crazy, which usually meant Caleb had stopped paying somebody on time. My mother called me about that apartment on Thursday night while I was rinsing spinach in the sink. "Baby," she said, drawing the word out the way she did when she wanted something to sound gentle before making it heavy. "Your brother is in a bind." I shut off the water and waited. "It's temporary," she went on. "He just needs a little help getting straight." "Okay," I said. "What kind of help?" There was the tiniest pause. "Well, that's what I wanted to talk to you about on Sunday. I'm making pot roast, not can you lend him money, not can you help him move. Sunday, pot roast." My mother always preferred difficult conversations served with gravy. I looked past the sink window at the side yard at the half-dead hydrangea bush I kept promising myself I would dig up and replace and said the first true thing I had. "I'm not putting Caleb here." "Oh, Leah." A soft exhale. Nobody said that. But I heard something in her voice, then some already formed shape of a conversation, and I thought suddenly of the password folder and the way Evan had said later without looking at me. That night when he came home, I asked him again for the login. He was loosening his tie in the hallway mirror. "I forgot." "You forgot all day." He gave me a look that made me feel overly exacting, which was a talent of his when he wanted it to be. "It's a folder, Leah, not Fort Knox." The answer that rose in me was sharper than I wanted. "Maybe not to you." Instead, I said, "I need the insurance renewal before Monday. I'll send it." He walked past me toward the bedroom, and for one stupid instant I smelled perfume that wasn't mine. Not strong. Not lipstick on a collar obvious, just something sweet and department store floral clinging faintly to his coat when he brushed my shoulder. My face went hot with such immediate humiliation that I hated myself for it. I did not want to become the kind of wife who stood in her own hallway trying to identify another woman by scent. I slept badly and woke up embarrassed. By Sunday afternoon, I had managed to tell myself a story I could live with. Maybe he was distracted. Maybe he had borrowed somebody's car at work. Maybe my mother was going to ask for money, not space. Maybe I was tired enough to make patterns out of static. Sunday dinner at my mother's house had looked the same for 15 years. Church first, then home to change, then whatever was in the crockpot or roasting pan, the television low in the den, sweet tea in the heavy sweating glasses nobody else in America seemed to own anymore. My mother lived in the same ranch house in Fern Creek where Caleb and I grew up, with the fake magnolia wreath on the front door and the hallway photos she never updated often enough. When Evan and I walked in, the smell of onion beef and black pepper hit first. Then my mother's voice from the kitchen. "Shoes off if they're muddy." Evan went to kiss her cheek before I had finished setting down the pie plate I'd brought. She smiled at him in that soft, relieved way she used around men she wanted to believe would steady things. "How's my favorite son-in-law?" she asked. "You only have one," I said. She smiled without really hearing me. "Still counts." Caleb came in from the back patio with his phone in his hand and that restless energy he always had when he was already halfway irritated at life. "You park behind me?" he asked. "No." "Good. I may need to head out early." My mother frowned. "You could stay through one meal." He shrugged. "Depends." There it was. The family weather system in one exchange. Caleb making movement feel urgent, my mother bending toward it automatically. Me standing there with aluminum foil still on the pie plate. We sat down around 5:30. Pot roast mashed potatoes, green beans cooked soft, with bacon, store-bought rolls warmed in the oven. My mother asked Evan about work. Caleb talked about a guy he knew who was flipping trucks for cash. Nobody asked me much except whether I still liked the women in my office and whether I had finally gotten the gutter fixed on the back corner of the house. "Not yet," I said. "You should let Caleb do it," my mother said quickly. "He's handy." Caleb snorted into his tea. Not for free, it was a joke technically. Everybody let it pass like one. Halfway through dinner, my mother set down her fork and folded her napkin beside her plate with more care than necessary. I saw it happen anew. There are gestures in a family that carry the same meaning every time. In Oz, that one meant brace yourself. So she said, looking at me in the careful tone people use when they want credit for kindness before they've earned it. "I've been thinking about Caleb." Caleb leaned back and stared at the ceiling like he was already tired of his own rescue. I kept my fork in my hand. I figured. My mother ignored the edge in my voice. "He's had a hard run." Evan said nothing. That was the first thing that really scared me. He had a way of smoothing awkward moments usually, filling silence with practical language, but he just sat there with his water glass in his hand, eyes lowered to the table like he already knew the script. "It's temporary," my mother said. "That's the important thing." I looked at Caleb. "Temporary what?" He shifted in his chair. "The apartment thing is done." "What does that mean?" "It means the lease is over." "That is not what done means." "Leah," my mother said, warning already creeping into her voice, as though my tone were becoming the problem before the facts had even arrived. I turned to Evan then because some stubborn part of me still expected my husband's face to be the place reality corrected itself. Instead, he cleared his throat and said, "Your mom's just worried about him landing somewhere decent for a few weeks." The room went so still inside me I could hear the hum of the refrigerator in the garage through the laundry room wall. "A few weeks," I repeated. "No one is asking for anything unreasonable," my mother said quickly. "And your house has space." My house. Not the house, not Grandma Ruthie's house. Mine suddenly, but only in the grammatical sense that made it easier to assign. I looked from her to Caleb to Evan, and something about the angles of their bodies made the truth arrive before the words did. Caleb wasn't embarrassed enough. My mother wasn't tentative enough. Evan wasn't surprised enough. This had been discussed. "Leah's commute is already long enough," Evan said, still not looking directly at me. "If Caleb took the back room for a little while and helped with upkeep, it could actually work out better than you think." I stared at him. My mother reached beside her plate and lifted a manila envelope I had not noticed sitting on the sideboard. She set it gently on the tablecloth between the salt and pepper like she was laying down a church bulletin. "I didn't want this to feel chaotic," she said. "So I printed a few things just so we could all look at options sensibly." Printed a few things. My fingers went cold around my fork. Caleb finally looked at me then, and there was impatience in his face, not shame. As if the hardest part of this had already happened somewhere without me, and all that remained was my cooperation. Evan set his glass down beside his plate and without touching me, without even pretending to reach for my hand under the table, said in his low, reasonable voice, "Just hear it out, Leah." That was the moment something in me tipped from unease into recognition. Not because I understood everything yet, but because my husband was seated on their side of the table before anyone had even asked for the house key. For a second after Evan said it, nobody moved. The pot roast smell was still in the room. The green beans were cooling in the serving bowl. My mother had one hand resting on the manila envelope like she was holding down a napkin in a breeze. There was something so ordinary about all of it that I think my body refused the truth before my mind did. I looked at Evan first, because looking at my mother or Caleb would have made the room split open too fast. What do you mean, hear it out? His face did that careful thing I'd once mistaken for kindness. His eyebrows pulled together just enough. His mouth stayed level. He looked like a man trying to calm a situation, not one who had helped create it. Your mom's not saying Caleb lives there forever, he said. She's saying there's a practical short-term solution right in front of us. Us. My mother slid the envelope a little closer across the table. It's just notes, honey. Cost-sharing ideas. A temporary arrangement. Caleb helping with utilities, yard work, that kind of thing. Caleb let out a short breath through his nose. You say it like I'm asking to move into Buckingham Palace. No, I said. I'm saying it like you're talking about my house. The room tightened. My mother gave me a wounded look that would have worked on me 2 hours earlier, and that right there is exactly what I was afraid of. What were you afraid of, I asked. That you'd get territorial before we could even have a conversation. Territorial. I actually laughed once at that, but nothing about it sounded amused. You brought printed papers. Her fingers pressed down on the envelope. Because I know how emotional these things can get. That sentence might have been the moment I understood how far outside the circle I already was. Emotional these things can get, as if the emotion had come into the room with me instead of with a folder of plans made without my knowledge. I turned to Caleb. How long have you known about this? He didn't answer right away, which was answer enough. Caleb. He rolled one shoulder. Mom mentioned it. When? A few days ago. I looked at Evan then. He held my gaze for maybe half a second before reaching for his water glass. A few days ago, I repeated. My mother jumped in too quickly. That doesn't mean anyone was doing anything behind your back. It meant exactly that, and they all knew it. I pushed my chair back. The sound of the legs scraping the floor was harsher than I meant it to be, but I was glad for it. I needed something in that room to admit friction. I'm not discussing my house like this, Leah Evans said, warning in his voice now, the soft public tone slipping just enough for me to hear the private one underneath it. I looked at him and felt for the first time all night something cleaner than hurt. No. My mother straightened in her chair. You don't get to storm out every time family needs something. Need something, I said. You mean wants access. Caleb muttered, Jesus Christ. That did it. Not the words themselves. The boredom in them. The way he sounded like I was making this difficult by requiring that my consent matter. I picked up my purse, said goodnight to no one, and walked out through the laundry room because I could not stand the idea of using the front hall like a guest in my own family. Evan followed me before I was halfway to the car. Leah. I kept walking. Leah stopped. I turned at the driver's side door. The security light over my mother's garage washed half his face in weak yellow. What? He came toward me with both hands slightly out like I was the one creating danger. You are overreacting. I stared at him. I'm overreacting. Yes, he said, and even then he still sounded tired instead of cruel, which somehow made it worse. Because nobody is taking anything from you. Your mom is trying to keep Caleb from ending up in some dump or sleeping on a friend's couch, and you're trying to help her do that with my house. He rubbed the back of his neck. I'm trying to get you to think bigger than your first instinct. That landed harder than if he'd called me selfish. My first instinct. As if the problem was not that he had joined them, but that I had failed to rise above ownership quickly enough. You discussed this without me, I said. He exhaled. We talked generally. Leah, come on. No. My voice was steadier now. You don't get to come on me, not tonight. He looked toward the house, maybe checking whether anyone was watching through the kitchen window. Your mom is scared. Caleb's a mess. Everybody knows you're the one person who can keep things from getting worse. There it was. The old family gospel in one sentence. Everybody knows. I opened my car door. Don't do this, he said. I got in, shut the door, and locked it before he could say anything else. He stood there another few seconds, one hand on his hip, looking not heartbroken or even angry exactly, just inconvenienced. I drove home with my jaw so tight it ached. The house felt different when I unlocked it that night. Not because it had changed. Because I had. The living room lamp cast the same warm cone over the crocheted blanket on the couch. The hallway still smelled faintly like lemon cleaner from Saturday morning. My grandmother's old wall clock still clicked one beat louder than it should have between the kitchen and the back hall. I stood just inside the front door and looked around like someone might already have been there. That frightened me enough that I checked the windows. Then I hated myself for doing it. Then I remembered the locked folder and stopped hating myself. I did not sleep much. Evan came home after 11. I heard his truck in the driveway and the soft curse when he bumped his shin on the step stool I had left in the mudroom. For one wild second, I thought maybe he would come in and apologize, or at least try to explain in a way that acknowledged I was his wife and not the hardest part of a group project. Instead, he showered, got into bed, and said into the dark, "Your mom cried after you left." I stared at the ceiling. "That what this is about for you?" I asked. "Which woman in your life had the rougher evening?" He let out a breath. "I'm not doing this at midnight." "No," I thought. "You did it at dinner." In the morning, he left before I came downstairs. On the kitchen counter beside the coffee pot, he had finally written the new folder password on a yellow sticky note. Calhoun 27. My grandmother's maiden name was Calhoun. The house file password had been changed to the name of the woman who left me the house. I stood there in my robe holding that note and felt something inside me go very still. Maybe he thought it would look efficient. Maybe he thought it would flatter me somehow, like invoking family history softened betrayal. Or maybe he had simply spent enough time talking to my mother and Caleb that the house had already become shared language in his mind. I logged in before work. The folder looked mostly the same at first. Insurance, utilities, tax receipt, a scanned copy of my grandmother's probate letter. Then a new document caught my eye. Untitled PDF. Created Friday, 9:14 p.m. I opened it. It was a county parcel map of my property with the lot lines outlined in blue and the square footage listed at the bottom. Nothing handwritten, nothing dramatic, just the kind of dry administrative document nobody would print unless they were already thinking about the house as a thing to be measured, used, divided, or discussed. I sat down at the kitchen table so suddenly the chair legs squealed against the floor. Friday. He and I had eaten Thai takeout on the couch Friday. He had asked if I wanted the last spring roll. He had rubbed my foot absent-mindedly during a commercial break. He had gone to bed beside me and said he was tired. At some point during that ordinary evening, he had also created a parcel map of my house. I went to work anyway because the office ran on closings and deadlines, not shock. Marlene Bishop was already at her desk when I got in, her reading glasses low on her nose and her silver hair clipped back with the same tortoiseshell barrette she wore every day. She had been in title work longer than I'd been alive and had the kind of face that made dishonesty feel both embarrassing and pointless. She looked up once and said, "You look awful." "Thank you. Coffee's fresh." I poured a cup and stood there holding it until she said, without looking up from the file in her hand, "Whatever it is, either say it or go throw up. Don't hover." That was Marlene's version of tenderness. I took the sticky note out of my purse and set it on her desk beside the parcel map I had printed before leaving the house. She read the password first, then the date stamp on the map. One eyebrow moved maybe half an inch. Who pulled this? I don't know for sure. Who had access? My husband. She took off her glasses. That bad, huh? I told her most of it then. Not every emotional contour, just the facts. Sunday dinner, the envelope, Caleb's apartment, Evan saying we. By the time I finished, my coffee had gone lukewarm in my hand. Marlene listened without interrupting, which is rarer kindness than people realize. When I was done, she tapped one fingernail once against the parcel printout. "This wasn't downloaded by accident. I know. And this," she lifted the sticky note, "that's worse. Why? Because it tells me he expected to need the folder again." Something in my chest sank lower. Marlene turned to her computer and typed for a minute. I watched the side of her face while the printer hummed in the back room, and somebody down the hall laughed too loudly at something that had nothing to do with me. Then she stopped typing. "Leah." I already hated the sound of my own name in that tone. "Last Thursday, someone called asking general transfer questions tied to your address." For a second, I did not understand the sentence because every word in it was ordinary, and together they were unbearable. What kind of questions? Ownership history, chain of title, whether there were any existing encumbrances that would complicate adding an occupant agreement or later transfer structure. She looked at me over the top of her monitor. He didn't give a full name, but he said the property belonged to his wife and that the family was trying to help a relative land softly. My whole body went cold. "Did you talk to him?" "No." Janice took the call up front and passed the question back because she thought it sounded slippery. Marlene's mouth tightened. I remember it because she asked if she should log the address for follow-up. Did she? Yes. She printed something, pulled it from the tray, and laid it face down on her desk for a moment before sliding it toward me like she was giving me a fragile diagnosis. It was the call log. Date, time, my address. Brief summary. My eyes went straight to the time. Thursday, 6:18 p.m. That was while I had been standing in my kitchen rinsing spinach, listening to my mother tell me she wanted to talk about Caleb on Sunday. The room tipped sideways in slow motion, not enough to fall, enough to understand falling was possible. He had not been drifting away from me, he had not been flirting or wandering or keeping some stupid half-baked secret with another woman in a parking lot somewhere. He had been coordinating. The humiliation of that was so much worse than jealousy that I almost missed jealousy for a second just because it would have been smaller. Simpler. Another woman would have meant desire, weakness, selfishness. This was colder. This was planning a way through me. I need the bathroom, I said. Marlene nodded once. Go. I made it to the single-stall bathroom by the back file room and locked myself in before I started crying. Not loud. Not movie crying. The kind that hurts your throat first and your face second and leaves you staring at beige cinder block while your body catches up to what your mind has already understood. In the middle of that, a memory came back so clearly it felt staged. 3 weeks earlier, I'd walked into the living room and found Evan sitting in my grandmother's old armchair with a yellow legal pad on his knee. He had looked up too fast and folded the page over. What's that? I'd asked. Nothing. Budget stuff. I remember teasing him then. Since when do you do budget stuff by hand? He smiled and said, since spreadsheets make me feel 80. I had laughed. I had kissed the top of his head. I had gone into the kitchen to start dinner. Now locked in a work bathroom with mascara under my eyes, I understood the speed with which he had hidden the page. Not budget, notes, questions, numbers, maybe my address at the top. I splashed cold water on my wrists and waited until my face looked merely tired instead of broken. When I came back out, Marlene did not ask if I was okay. Another mercy. What are you going to do? She asked. I looked down at the call log again. The paper shook a little in my hand. I don't know yet. Yes, you do. I met her eyes. You are not a woman who doesn't know, she said. You are a woman who wishes other people had behaved well enough to save you the trouble of deciding. That stayed with me all afternoon. At 5:30, as I was pulling into my driveway, my phone rang through the truck speakers. Caleb. I almost let it go to voicemail. Then I answered. What? He laughed once. Nice, I'm not in the mood. Then let's not do drama. Mom wanted to know if Sunday still works. Sunday? Yeah. He sounded distracted, like he was walking somewhere, keys jangling in one hand. For going over the room setup and all that. I gripped the steering wheel harder. What room setup? He went quiet for a beat too long, then too fast. Nothing. Just if I'm staying there a while, I figured. You figured what? That the back room makes the most sense, obviously. It's separate enough. Separate enough. He said it with the easy confidence of somebody speaking about a choice already moving toward him. And in that instant, the last soft lie inside me gave way. This was not my husband being practical in a hard moment. This was not my mother being overbearing. This was not Caleb hoping. They had made a timeline. They had discussed rooms. They had asked title questions, even had changed passwords, pulled documents, and still come to bed beside me like the only thing between us was stress. He had not been building toward an affair. He had been building access. I can't talk right now, I said. Leah, I hung up. Then I sat in the driveway with the engine running and watched the porch light come on, by timer warm and automatic against the early dark. Sunday, I thought. They still thought I was coming in blind. For the first time since that dinner, I did not feel confused. I felt awake. Sunday came in gray and windless, the kind of Kentucky afternoon that made every yard look flatter than it was. I cleaned the kitchen even though it was already clean, wiped the counters, straightened the dish towel on the oven handle, refilled the sugar jar I never used except when company came over. Not because I wanted them comfortable, because routine was the only thing that kept my hands from shaking. Evan had gone to his brother's that morning to give everybody some space, which would have sounded considerate if I hadn't known by then that space was one more thing he liked arranging when it made him look decent. He texted around noon. Let's please keep this calm today. I stared at the message until the words blurred, then set my phone face down on the counter. At 2:30, I carried the dining chairs in from the wall and set 4 around the table instead of 3. My mother, Caleb, Evan, me. Then I stood there looking at the 4th chair for a long second before walking it back out again and replacing it with 2 folding chairs from the hall closet. Not family dinner chairs. Witness chairs. Marlene arrived first, exactly on time, in a navy windbreaker and sensible flats, carrying nothing but her purse and the expression she wore whenever somebody tried to waste her morning with nonsense. Pastor Mercer came 3 minutes later with his Bible in one hand and his car keys in the other, his face solemn but steady. He took one look at me on the porch and said quietly, "You don't have to do this cruelly to do it clearly." "I know," I said. That was all. When my mother's Buick pulled into the driveway, my pulse started beating in my throat. Caleb got out first, shoulders already tense, phone in hand. My mother came around more slowly, smoothing the front of her cardigan before she even reached the walk. Evan's truck turned in behind them half a minute later. He stepped out, saw Marlene and Pastor Mercer on the porch, and stopped. "What is this?" he asked. "No ambush," I said, "just no more private versions." My mother's face changed first, not guilt. Irritation, the kind she always got when a room stopped cooperating with the role she had planned for herself inside it. "Leah," she said in that soft, warning voice, "this is not necessary. It is for me." Caleb looked from me to Marlene, then to Pastor Mercer. "Are you serious?" "Yes." Evan shut his truck door harder than he needed to. "You invited people from outside the family into this," I looked at him. "You started involving outsiders when somebody called a title office about my property before anyone spoke to me." That landed, not loudly, just enough to make all three of them go still. My mother recovered first. "I don't know what you think you heard, but come inside," I said. I did not raise my voice. I did not ask. I just opened the front door and walked in first. The house smelled like lemon cleaner and old wood. My grandmother's wall clock ticked steadily between the kitchen and hallway. On the dining table, I had placed a yellow legal pad, a glass of water, and 3 sheets of paper clipped neatly together. Beside them sat my phone. Nobody touched anything. My mother took the chair nearest the end of the table as if proximity to authority still belonged to her by instinct. Caleb dropped into the folding chair with one knee bouncing. Evan stayed standing for a second, then pulled out the last chair and sat down carefully like he still believed posture might save him. Marlene stood near the kitchen counter. Pastor Mercer remained by the doorway to the living room, not imposing, just present enough to make lying harder. My mother folded her hands. "All right," she said. "Since we're doing this in such a dramatic way, why don't you tell us what exactly the problem is?" I looked at her for a moment. Not long enough to be theatrical, just long enough for her to hear herself. "The problem," I said, "is that all of you have been speaking about my house like my consent was a scheduling issue." Caleb made a disgusted sound. "Oh my God." "No," I said, turning to him. "You don't get to do that. Not today." He leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. "Do what? Act like my reaction is the embarrassing part." His mouth tightened, but he said nothing. My mother jumped in exactly as she always had. "Leah, nobody is trying to take anything from you." I slid the first page across the table. The call log from Marlene's office. She looked down at it and frowned. "What is this?" "The record of a phone call made Thursday at 6:18 p.m. asking transfer and title questions about this address." Caleb blinked once. Evan did not move. My mother looked up too fast. "I didn't call anybody." "I didn't say you did." Her gaze flicked involuntarily toward Evan. That was all I needed. He exhaled through his nose. "Leah, that doesn't prove what you think it proves." I turned to him. "Then help me understand. Why was anybody making title-related inquiries about my property before Sunday dinner happened?" He spread his hands slightly, calm, man a posture. "Because your mother was worried and I was trying to get information before everybody got spun up." "Everybody. You know what I mean." "I do now." My mother pushed the paper back toward me with her fingertips like it was distasteful. "Getting information isn't a crime." "No," I said. "Planning around my consent isn't one either. It's just betrayal." Caleb sat forward. "You keep using that word like we were plotting against you." "Mom asked for help. Evan made one call. That's not a conspiracy." I picked up my phone. "You're right," I said. "The call isn't the point." I pressed play. Caleb's voice filled the kitchen, tinny and unmistakable. "Mom thinks if we do it Sunday with the papers ready, she won't drag it out. Just make sure Leah doesn't get all emotional before we can explain it right." Nobody in the room moved. Even the clock seemed louder after it ended. I looked at my brother. He had gone pale in a way I had not seen since he was 15 and got caught lying about wrecking my mother's car. That was out of context. What context makes that better? It was frustration, he snapped. I was venting. About what? My ownership. My mother pressed one hand flat to the table. Caleb should not have said it that way. That way. Not he shouldn't have said it, just that way. Something almost calm moved through me. Then the kind of clarity that comes when pain has finally repeated itself enough times to lose its disguises. I looked at her and said, "That is the entire family right there." She stared back. "What is? You never stop the thing. You correct the tone." Her face changed just a little. I had never said that out loud before. Caleb turned towards her. Mom. No, I said. Let her hear it. Evan leaned forward. Leah. Nobody is denying this was handled badly, but that doesn't make your reaction proportionate. I laughed once softly. My reaction. He nodded as if relieved to be back on familiar ground. Yes, because instead of talking like adults, you bring in witnesses and try to make us sound predatory when this started with one simple issue. Caleb needs somewhere to land. I held his gaze. Then you should have started there. We did. No. You started with access. Passwords. Files. Calls. Papers. You started with how to get me cornered before you started with what you wanted. For the first time, he had no ready answer. Pastor Mercer spoke, then not loudly. There is a difference between a request and an arrangement. Evan turned toward him. With respect, Pastor, this is a family matter. It became a moral matter the moment truth began arriving in parts. Silence followed that. Marlene set her purse on the counter and stepped closer to the table. I've seen plenty of families make hard property decisions, she said. They usually begin by informing the owner. Caleb stood up so fast his chair legs scraped the floor. Fine. Great. Everybody thinks I'm some freeloader piece of shit. Is that what this is? No, I said. This is me being done paying for your emergencies with the parts of my life you all think cost me less. He stared at me. And because he did, because for once he was actually listening instead of waiting for someone else to interrupt on his behalf, I kept going. You lose apartments, I said. You quit jobs. You move through people and places like they're temporary, and every single time this family rearranges itself around the idea that your discomfort matters more than somebody else's stability. Mom calls it worry, Evan calls it practicality, you call it bad luck. But the shape is always the same. My mother's voice shook. He is your brother. Yes, I said, turning to her. And I've loved him his whole life. I picked him up from school when you worked late. I covered for him when he flunked algebra. I gave him grocery money that never came back. I answered calls at midnight. I have been his sister every single time it counted. The room had gone so quiet I could hear the refrigerator hum, but I am not his backup plan anymore. My mother blinked hard, and for a second I saw something real in her face, not strategy, not guilt exactly. Fear, the fear of a system ending. Leah, she said softer, now family helps family. I nodded. Yes, family also asks. That seemed to hit her harder than everything else. Evan shifted in his chair. So what? That's it. You're blowing up your marriage over this. I looked at him and felt the answer settle with surprising gentleness. No, I said. You did that when you learned the language my family uses to take from me and started speaking it better than they do. He opened his mouth, then closed it. I could see the calculation in him, even then the search for some version of events that left him reasonable. That was the saddest part in the end. Not that he had betrayed me, that he still wanted to be admired for how calmly he had done it. My mother stood abruptly, cardigan sleeves sliding down her wrists. I did not raise you to be hard. I stood too. No, I said. You raised me to be useful. There's a difference. Her eyes filled then, and because she was my mother, some old reflex in me moved toward comfort before I stopped it. That was the cost, I think, of finally becoming clear. Not that love vanished, that it no longer got to outrank truth. Caleb grabbed his keys off the table. Forget it, he muttered. I'm done. Yes, I said. So am I. He looked at me like he wanted one last opening, one last chance to make me feel cruel enough to fold. When he didn't find it, he walked out. The front door shut hard behind him. My mother lingered a second longer. You'll regret talking to me this way. Maybe once I would have. Instead, I said, what I regret is how long it took me to hear what you've been saying all these years. She flinched like I had slapped her. Then she left too. Evan was last. He stood slowly, eyes on me, and for a second I thought he might actually say something true, something unguarded, that this had gone too far, that he had chosen wrong, that he was sorry. What he said was, you're making this uglier than it had to be. I almost smiled. No, I said, I'm just not carrying the pretty version for you anymore. He looked toward Marlene, then Pastor Mercer, then back at me, and finally understood there was nowhere left in the room to place his explanation. When he left, he did it without slamming the door. Of course he did. Afterward, nobody rushed to fill the silence. Marlene gathered the papers into one neat stack and clipped them together. Keep copies somewhere else too, she said. I will. Pastor Mercer came closer, resting one hand on the back of a chair. Your grandmother used to say a house can tell when it's being defended. I let out a breath that almost felt like a laugh. Did she? She also said screen doors have better manners than most people. That one did make me smile, small and unwilling but real. When they were gone, I locked the front door and stood alone in the kitchen. The room looked unchanged. Same pale cabinets, same fruit bowl with 2 soft apples in it, same thin line of afternoon light on the floor near the back door. And yet the house felt larger somehow, as if the air had been holding itself tight for days and had finally unclenched. I washed the untouched glasses from the table, wiped the crumbs into my hand, folded the spare chairs and carried them back to the closet. Only when everything was put away did I let myself stop moving. I took my grandmother's keyring from the dish by the refrigerator, brass house key, tiny faded Kroger tag, the rabbit's foot charm she would have hated me calling ugly. Then I stepped out onto the front porch and sat down on the top step. The evening was cooler now. A lawnmower droned somewhere down the block, then cut off. Somebody's wind chime clinked twice and went still. The porch light threw a soft circle over the chip paint my grandmother always said she'd get to in the spring, and never quite did. I turned the keys in my palm and listened to the screen door settle behind me. Not slam, not rattle, settle. I thought about my mother in her car, furious and wounded at once. About Caleb driving somewhere without a plan, still half convinced the world had been unfair to him. About Evan going back to whatever version of himself he could still live with tonight. None of it felt good. But for the first time in longer than I could name, it also did not feel like mine to fix. That was the strange warmth of it. Not triumph, not relief exactly, just the absence of the old tug, the old demand, the old instinct to run after everybody else's pain and make room for it inside me. The house was quiet in a way that felt unfamiliar at first, then slowly, like safety. I sat there until the sky dimmed from gray to blue-black and the porch light drew moths from somewhere unseen. The keys stayed warm in my hand. Behind me, the screen door gave one last small settling sound and the house held.